We're back. It's the Weird Rap Discussion Gang. We got special guests, Skiz Fernando, author of the brand new book, The Streets of Shaolin, the Wu-Tang Saga, which I've just received my copy last night. Very pleased with it so far. I just read the preface so far, but I already learned a new word, rhoticism. Is that the word? Am I even saying it right? Rhoticism?
Yeah, that's it. Yep, rhoticism.
Yeah. And I also learned that Skiz, you were part of the skit intro of the Gravedigger's Diary of a Madman, which is a pretty cool, pretty cool credit to have.
The crooked lawyer.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm looking forward to reading the rest of it. We got Chief Doomsday, and we are going to talk about Cypress Hill, their debut album, the self-titled debut from 1991. We're coming up on the 30th anniversary on August 13th. So I thought it'd be fitting to get into this album, which is groundbreaking in many ways. And why don't we just start at the beginning with track 1, simply and elegantly titled Pigs.
They have a van parked in front of the location with the above their lot. They'll find out the location. 71 next to 200,
This pig harassed the whole neighborhood. Well, this pig worked at the station. This pig, he killed my homeboy, so that fucking pig went on a vacation. This pig, he is the chief. Got a brother pig, Captain O'Malley.
Yeah, wonderful way to start off the album. A lot to say about this track alone, I think. I love how it starts off with the police scanner, gives it this kind of raw edge, I would say. And I really like how later in the track that like clicking on and off of the walkie-talkie radio thing comes in as like a kind of a snare percussion sound near the end. And of course, like using noise is a big part of this whole album and what made it really stand out, I think. And yeah, just this joyful tone of the music as well, which is something that happens throughout the album, just like this happy sounding music with these dark lyrics. And then again, the silly cartoonish voice of Be Real talking about this street gangster shit. Just a great balance and tension between different elements. But yeah, what strikes you guys about it?
I got to ask real quick before we even go into that. You said happy sounding production?
Yeah.
That's just an interesting read to me, man. I would love to, if you had a moment.
I know exactly what you mean. It's like kind of like that Ghostface's like kiddie songs. It was like nostalgic, like kiddie tunes, I know what you mean, Jonah.
And I never thought of that before until this last week when I was re-listening to it. But listen, Chief, when we're going through the rest of the tracks, you'll be like surprised maybe.
No, that's just it, and it's not even like something I'm trying to dispute. That's just an interesting read. That's never anything I've like thought about when I've thought about Muggs' production, even on this album specifically. But yeah, I get what you mean though, like the elements that he uses in the production and kind of the way that he executes it throughout. Because we're definitely going to talk about Muggs' production throughout this album.
For sure.
One thing that was always cool about this track, because everybody loved this back in my high school and back in middle school. Like, even if you didn't listen to this whole album, everybody knew Pigs, and people were like rapping that song Pigs. And like the This Little Piggy thing always was like an immediate, I got that. But then like when I discovered Animal Farm and read Animal Farm, I was like, oh, wow, this is kind of like a mix of the two. It's like sort of a nursery rhymey, This Little Piggy type stuff, but then they're using pigs in sort of the pigs rule kind of way. Just talking about how crooked they are, even though they're supposed to be like this righteous force, they're really just imposing their will. And they're just humans just like the rest of us, so some are bad, some are good, some are crooked, some are opportunistic, some get what they deserve in the end, it was an interesting, like, double layered kind of symbolism that he used on there in a very, like, deceptively simple song.
Yeah, I feel like it's like a more subtle and playful kind of update to Fuck the Police, too.
Exactly. I was going to say that because this is coming off the heels of, you know, when did this come out? 91. This is coming off the heels of NWA's explosive breakout on the West Coast. But just to kind of rewind a bit and talk about a little bit of the background of this album as we were talking pre-show, you know, Cypress Hill was a very different group at the time when they came out. You got two Latinos and a white dude from Queens, a transplant from Queens, New York, who moved to LA to Southgate, lived in the same neighborhood as Louis Freeze and Sen Reyes, you know, a Cuban immigrant. And they just grew up in the same neighborhood, just naturally gravitated towards hip hop, making beats. And also in the group was Sen's brother. And I forget his real name, but his rap name was Mellow Man Ace. And he was signed to a major label. I think he was signed to Capitol Records. And actually when Ace got a solo deal, that's when Cypress Hill formed, because originally they were a group called DVX. That was the original Cypress Hill. That was Muggs with the Reyes brothers and Be Real. And DVX stands for Devastating Vocal Excellence. And then when Mellow Man Ace got the solo deal, then they became Cypress Hill because they lived on Cypress Ave in Southgate. And they lived on the hill part of it. But as we were talking, Chief, you would never think that they were from LA or from California when you look at the cover of the album or when you see their videos, because look at the cover of the album. It looks like a street corner in New York that gathered around a steel barrel trash can fire. And they got the hoods up, they got the fisherman hat. Like, who was big on the fisherman hat at that time? EPMD, East Coast Act,
yeah.
You know?
Right.
So they got that East Coast style. They got the hoods up. And all the videos were shot in New York. So most people thought that they were from New York, right? Even though Muggs was from New York. And they were bringing the gangster shit, the West Coast gangster shit, in a whole different way than NWA, and which, like you said, Jonah, was that whole cartoonish element, which starts with Be Real's voice. He's got that nasal voice, and then Muggs's production, that almost kind of upbeat, kind of children's melody type thing, the shit that like Ghostface would just rock off, you know. That's his bread and butter. But Muggs also had that high-pitched whine, you know, whereas Dre had the mini moog, the high-pitched keys. Muggs had the whistles and the high-pitched whine, which is almost on every track.
Yes.
You know? So they're bringing a whole different flavor of West Coast hip-hop. It's almost a fusion of East and West Coast. You know,
it's 100%. It's like a perfect marriage of both of them. You know, so much so to where it's at the time you just associate hip hop with New York mostly because you know the chronic boom hadn't happened yet. You know, but yeah, it's a trip.
And it's on Rough House, which is a label based in Philly, because Joe the Butcher Nicolo, who recorded the album, who produced the album at his studio in Philly, they were signed to his label, Rough House Columbia, which had a relationship with Columbia Records. So yeah, you know, it's like a weird situation, but they still heavily West Coast flavor, you know, especially the lyrics, the subject matter, all that gang shit, but almost expressed in a Tarantino-esque kind of way, where it's just like over the top. It's funny. Like how could I just kill a man? I mean, that's a heavy song, man.
Very much so.
Yeah. We'll get into that. I guess, yeah, that's up next. But yeah, one thing I feel like we definitely have to mention, like when you're talking about all the New York elements of this group, like the sonic quality as well, like specifically, I feel like in the Bomb Squad way, like I feel like Bomb Squad and Public Enemy is specifically must have been who really influenced Muggs with the squeals and the shrieks, and the noise elements. I just feel like there's a real strong tie between the two. But yeah,
I 100% agree. And they do have like connecting. There's homie connections within those two camps.
right.
Yeah, you look at the production, like a typical song on this Cypress Hill album has maybe like 10, 11, 12, 13 samples. You know, it's not just one loop and a break. You know, there's like layers of shit going on. There's a sample that might come in just one time, you know, that's totally Bomb Squad style. You know, Bomb Squad they took it to outer space, you know.
Totally. Yeah, the sample fragments as opposed to loops, that definitely really struck me when I was re-listening this past week.
Bring it up in a later song too, but Muggs is also good about not just using one part of the album. Like he'll pull one or two really cool bigger elements, but then he'll just pull little like vocal snippets and ad libs out the back and just punctuation elements and like sprinkles. And he's very efficient in the way that he like chops up stuff.
That's his DJ background, you know, and that attention to detail is what really makes a, you know, super producer in this era. All the guys of this era who we know, Pete Rock, you know, Large Professor, you know, Premier, all these guys had such an attention to detail. It wasn't just like a loop and a break and a hook. You know, these guys had every little thing. And, you know, especially Premier too, he's a DJ, you know, so that's where that comes from, that ear for, ooh, let's put a little thing in here, you know?
Yeah, I just learned this past week too that Muggs won like a DMC championship in the late 80s.
Oh, yeah.
And then he kind of supposedly became disillusioned with the whole turntablist world and industry and decided to focus on production instead. But yeah, I became really curious about Muggs. Like, I'd like to know more about this dude because he's done so much since then. And I was actually trying to research, like, what did he do before Cypress Hill? And all that I could find as far as his production goes is one song on the Mellow Man Ace album he produced, which is really cool. You know, it came out in '89, a couple years before this album, but it sounds very much like he was like a fully formed, like in this style, even from that beginning, with this, you know, the shrieks and whatever you call them, whistles or whatever. But yeah, he's a talented man.
Yeah, he was young. He was young back then, you know. He was probably like 20, you know. The amazing thing is just what he's been doing in the last few years and right now, you know, how he's been involved with so many new artists. And he's like leading the pack production wise. Like his production, I feel, is like what a lot of other young producers now are following, you know?
Yeah, it's amazing how he's kept up with the times, or how the times have kept up with him. I don't know. It's like he influenced this lineage. I feel like, you know, you could kind of draw a line between Bomb Squad to Muggs to RZA and Wu-Tang to like everything in between up until like the Griselda and this new school of still kind of raw, lo-fi, off-kilter, the little elements of noise and just off the beaten track of the mainstream. But he's been there all along.
The grind
tricky,
stuff.
you know, he even worked with Tricky in between there, who I think was also probably influenced by him and the Bomb Squad. But yeah,
branch out into the Soul Assassins thing too. He's worked with a wide breadth of people.
Yeah, Wu-Tang guys, all those.
But think about it. This album, this first Cypress Hill album, was on Columbia. That's a huge label, you know, huge. So yeah. I mean, it was a special time because there's so many good records like this. Like you would think this is like an underground record. Right. This was actually a really hugely popular record, you know.
Yeah, no, this was super mainstream.
Hugely popular.
When we get into the next song, it's even that much more.
Yeah, let's play some music.
I was just going to bring up real quick. I know we've been piling on Pigs, but you were asking about Muggs' career before. I don't remember what band he was in, but he was like the DJ for a group that was signed to MCA.
783.
That's it. Yeah. Yeah, right before Cypress Hill as well. So even though he was young and had that DMC win, he already had like professional experience too. You know, he's bringing just wisdom to the production, you know.
All right, How I Could Just Kill a Man.
It's another one of them old funky Cypress Hill things. You know what I'm saying? And it goes like this.
Hey, don't miss out on what you're passing. You're missing the hooter of the funky Buddha. A looter of your fucked up styles to get wicked. So come on, the Cypress starts to kick it. Cause we're like the outlaw style. It was suckers are hiding. Jump behind the bush when they see me driving by. Hanging out the window with my magnum. Taking out some putos, acting kinda local. I'm just another local kid from the street getting paid for my vocal. Here is something you can't understand.
I could just kill a man.
Here is something you can't understand.
I could just kill a man.
Here is something you can't understand.
I could just kill a man.
This was the first Cypress Hill song I heard. I heard it on the radio and it bugged me out. Like I just remember, like I liked it, but I also remember feeling kind of chilled by the lyrics. Like I had been into NWA already, but there was something about this track, the way they just that line, how I could just kill a man, is like this casual, cold, like I'm a murderer, you know? Whereas like NWA was just like dramatic, over the top, like a movie. This was like, these guys probably really are murderers, and it like kind of freaked me out. I don't know, but you know, that was just my first impression with it.
Well, if you listen to the lyrics, though, everything they talk about killing wise is self-defense. At least in this song, it's all self-defense. So, I mean, yeah, they're killing people, but they're not out there like actively murdering motherfuckers in this song.
Yeah. I don't know why it hit me differently than NWA.
Chief, that's a very good point. Yeah.
Self-defense turns to the offense.
They're kind of justifying the whole shit that's going on in their neighborhood. You know, it's like sometimes you got to kill someone. You know, if they're pushing up on you, you know, it's kill or be killed in that type of environment. So.
Yeah, that's a note that I wrote about the song. I said it was the Castle Law theme song, basically. And it's an illustration of how economic disparity is a direct influence on your environment, and then transitively like your state of mind and your lifestyle and the way that you just have to like go about your environment.
Yeah, I mean, it may have been, as I was just like 13 or whatever at the time, it could have just also been like the sonic quality of it in combination with those lyrics, like, cause it's a creepy, unsettling kind of a sound that's backing it up too.
Oh, you're talking about the Jimi Hendrix sample?
Yeah,
the guitar. It's like apocalyptic, sort of.
It's crazy.
That Hendrix.
Yeah, it's like a sped up
Hendrix.
So, yeah, from Are You Experienced, where he's just going to church like on the singing and the guitar playing, but it sounds like a 33, like kicked up to a 45.
But the main loop is that Tramp, Lowell Fulson.
Yeah.
And that it immediately took me to EPMD, Slow Down Baby. You know, that's like Cypress Hill's flip on that sample.
This was also the first song I heard by them. And it was interesting because there's a handful of artists that my dad like hit me to. Because I was in 91, I was like 12, you know, going on 13. And my dad was still pretty heavy into hip hop and was like keeping an ear out for what was what. And plus he was always a self-defense advocate, you know, grew up out in the country. So they grew up with guns, you know. And it was one of those that he kind of brought to me and used it sort of as a life lesson. You know, he's like, hey, you shouldn't be out there seeking violence. You shouldn't be out there looking for trouble. But you can't control everything that's going on. And sometimes trouble finds you. And you kind of have to know how to take care of yourself and defend yourself and stand up for yourself. And this song is sort of a good illustration of extreme examples of that, you know?
Yeah, I guess I probably wasn't listening in too deeply at the time, but yeah, it immediately struck me as something new and different that I liked, especially B-Real's voice, of course.
The video was dope too. I know Skiz, you were saying today was the first time that you saw this video.
All of them.
There's so many people in this video, like Q-Tip and Ice Cube is hanging out back there. Yeah, Beastie Boys are on the train. Yeah, there's like so many cameos on what was probably their second single, I think, but the first one to pop. It's like, damn, these guys are connected right out the gate.
Yeah, this is a double A side with
Funky Feel one.
But I remember when Cypress came, I remember the record release party, which was at this club called Wetlands in New York. Back then, early 90s, the club scene was popping, and you know, especially downtown, hip hop was like the ruling sound. And this club called Wetlands was really like a hippie spot, but they had like good live shows. And for Cypress's record release, it's a pretty small, intimate club, and the stage is accessible by like 3 sides. So it's pretty intimate, and it's not that big. I would say maybe you could fit maybe like 500 people in there. But it was like double packed that night for the Cypress show. And I was walking on the ground. First of all, everyone was smoking blunts in there openly at a time when it was definitely not legal. You know, now we take it for granted, but back then it was not legal back then. And like the whole floor, it felt like sawdust, but it was actually the innards of blunts. Because people were just like slitting blunts and just throwing it on the floor. So you can imagine, like, after like 1,000 blunts, the floor is just like littered. And the place was just like the ultimate hot box. It was just like, if you didn't smoke in there, forget about it. You're going to get a contact anyway. And, you know, this is like the first time people had seen Cypress in person. Because like we said on the album cover and everything, you don't see their faces, you know? Even in like the videos, like Muggs is always covered up. So they really kind of played that mystique a lot too, you know, which I think was a smart marketing thing, the whole mystique. I remember the marketing campaign of Cypress Hill, because like even in ads in the source, like you never saw their faces and stuff like that, you know?
It was always like blurry.
Yeah.
And like, you know, elongated stuff.
And, you know, at that time, we don't realize it now, but at that time, the whole weed thing was huge in hip hop. Like blunts had just exploded. The Philly blunt cigar had just exploded, you know? And Cypress came right at the right time to kind of capitalize on that thing. Because it was still kind of a renegade thing too, smoking weed. You know, it was still illegal. You could still be arrested for it, even in New York. And, you know, they just came at that time. And it was just like, you know, now they're like normal spokesmen and all that stuff. And they probably have their own strains and all that stuff. But they really came heavy with that weed thing, you know. It was not just a concept, because when I interviewed them from my book, The New Beats, when I went to LA and I interviewed them, and I don't smoke when I'm doing interviews. I'm a smoker, but I don't smoke when I'm doing interviews. And it was Be Real and Sen, and they had a huge bag of this like serious chronic, man. And they were like chain smoking like it was cigarettes. And by the end of the interview, when I walked out of it was my first trip to LA, and I had a rental car, and I had to get back to the place I was staying. It took me like 3 hours to get back, man, because I was just getting lost.
That's funny.
So that was not just like a concept for them. That was their real lifestyle. It was like the weed thing too, you know.
The weed element of this album to me seemed really pronounced compared to anything else that came out before it. Like, I remember feeling like it was very rare for an artist to talk about smoking weed, a rap artist. You had like, I remember DJ Quick had one song about it. And then besides that, you know, there was a few little sneaky references here and there, but it wasn't until this album, as far as I know, where a rap group would really just get behind weed smoking in such a big way.
At that time, like the Philly Blunt brand just blew up. I mean, weed has always been such a huge part of hip hop anyway. But this was when it was kind of coming out into the open, you know? And for a group to be celebrating it, that's what I'm saying. Like at that opening show, when everyone was smoking out in the open, you know, people used to like keep it undercover because it's still illegal. And there were undercover cops at clubs and you could get busted. But they kind of liberated everyone in that respect, you know? So it was an important time.
From the singles they released, though, did y'all pick that up immediately, or did y'all not pick that up until you listened to the album?
I only heard that How I Could Just Kill a Man, so I didn't hear any weed reference until the album.
You know, the biggest weed reference is right behind you, Jonah. This skull.
Yeah, but I didn't see that on the radio.
Yeah. That was so much a part of their marketing plan, because I remember in the source they just had this.
Right.
They just had the logo and the date that it was dropping. So you didn't know anything about these guys, what they looked like, where they were from. You know, you just saw this big skull with the weed sign. You know, so you knew it's going to be some weed shit, you know?
Funny enough, I was still young enough to where I was innocent enough to not pick up on what that was turned upside down. You know? And it was like, and the first two songs I heard were How I Could Just Kill a Man and Hand on the Pump, because those were like the singles that kind of permeated nationwide. So it wasn't until I heard the album, and they didn't really have a weed song until like 5-6 songs in, but then they didn't stop with it. Like, it's like killing, getting high, killing it. But it was interesting to kind of get an education at that age about weed smoking and whatnot, you know. Because like Jonah said, people like Farside. Well, Farside was after them too. Was after Cypress Hill. But yeah, there was just like little sprinkled in references at different times, but nobody was really leaning into it the way y'all were talking about until they did. And then it just opened the floodgates for people to embrace it.
I mean, you hear Dr. Dre prior to this album, I don't smoke weed or cess. And then 2 years later, The Chronic.
Exactly.
All right, let's move on. This was my favorite song back in the days, Hand on the Pump.
Well, I'm an alley cat, some say a dirty man. On my side is my gut, see I'm all of that. Spitting out buck shots, boy, I'm gonna wet y'all. Running hot, but I'm still coming to get y'all. Thinking like a beast mode. at a bullet. Is this going booyah? You're stuck in my hood, so what you gonna do now? Being the hunted one is no fun. Here I come, son, yo, I think you better run. Better run more and move a little faster. Second of thought, and I'm coming to blast you with my sawed-off shotgun. Hand on the pump, left hand on the 40. Pump it on the blunt. Fuck my shotgun. The niggas didn't jump. La 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 la.
Yeah, I mean, what really strikes me about this song is just the fragments. Like, who in the world would have thought to use just those two first syllables of the Duke of Earl song in that way? And then these tiny little two guitar plucks. Dee-doo, dee-doo, dee-doo. Like, I mean, he just has a special ear, that Muggs. Yeah, I wouldn't expect, you wouldn't, especially at this time, you wouldn't expect to hear samples used in that way, I think.
That Duke of Earl flip was mind blowing.
Yeah.
And also just the rock influence that Muggs brings into it too. There's a lot of rock influence that he brings. If you examine all of the samples on this record.
Right.
And also like this psychedelic influence. He's like heavy into like psychedelics. And you can even today, the stuff that he puts out is very psychedelic, Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have ever read that Check the Technique book. They've got two volumes of it. But yeah, they have a chapter on the making of this album, and they talk about how it was kind of a preconceived plan that they would hide their faces, and they kind of talked about like the psychedelic rock influence as far as like the Led Zeppelin album covers and stuff, and how this mystique was all part of what they were inspired by. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I was listening to an interview with them from when they were just about to release this album, and Sen-Dog was already talking about how they were supposed to be named Cypress Hill 1, Cypress Hill 2, Cypress Hill 3 as far as the albums.
Right. And just that name too is so great. Like, especially at the time, again, you would not expect Cypress Hill to be the name of a rap group.
And it's funny because in New York, in Brooklyn, there's actually a projects in East New York called Cypress Hill. And I have a friend who lives there. It's a very, very rough projects. Like,
okay, I was wondering about that.
You're setting up exactly what I was about to bring up too. And I was going to say, John, an interesting bit of synchronicity. I don't know if y'all have ever heard people talk about the interview that Be Real had, where he talks about how the voice he uses isn't his real voice and etc.
Yeah, Ram LZ.
Oh, were you bringing that up later?
No, well, maybe, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, because, yeah, that's what it was. He was saying that the influence for doing that was Ram LZ, and it was specifically that song where on a Wild Style where he mentioned Cypress Hill. So I always thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, Ram LZ is...
Where Ram LZ says Cypress Hill in his lyric?
Oh,
yeah.
I don't know if Beat Bop was on the Wild Style soundtrack now I think about it, but it was on a Beat Bop. He
Okay.
When he first starts doing the really freaky voice, he mentions hanging out in Cypress Hill. I don't think he says he's from Cypress Hill, but he mentions Cypress Hill.
Well, he says "Break It Up, Cypress Hill," and that's where.
That's right.
The "Break It Up, Cypress Hill" track. That's where the vocal sample comes from on Beat Bop, but then also on the Wild Style soundtrack, Ram LZ shouts out Cypress Hill again, and they use those samples to great effect on this album. The two Cypress Hill. That's Hand on the Pump, I think it is.
Now you know what it is. Now you know what Cypress Hill is.
But also, it's funny because Ram LZ is the name of the album that Muggs came out with pretty recently with Flea Lord. They titled their album Ram LZ. It's like a tribute to him. And
really?
And to bring it full circle, on the very first track he produced on the Mellow Man Ace album, they sample another Ram LZ. He says, "This is the mellow," like from Beat Bop, and
this is the mellow they call the Ram L. Yeah, hell yeah.
So they use that to death, and they use that live at the amphitheater song, "Yeah, party people, just jock with the rhythm, party people," on the Muggs produced track. So it's like definitely Ram LZ plays this part in the Muggs Cypress Hill lineage.
But
Well, apparently, Be Real was a fan of Ram LZ, like independent of him too.
The gangster duck voice that Ram LZ introduces on Beat Bop.
Yeah, that's where Be Real got his voice from.
But how about Ad Rock? I thought Ad Rock was a huge influence on Be Real.
He's probably influenced by Ad Rock as well.
Wasn't there supposed to be this side project called the Nasal Poets or whatever it was?
The Nasal Tones.
Yeah, with Be Real, Q-Tip, and Ad Rock. Never happened,
yeah. Fucking Ad Rock used to shout that shit out like jokingly on a certain run of Beastie Boys albums.
I wonder if there's any recordings of Be Real in his normal voice.
There's a couple on this album. Or like not his normal speaking voice, but close to it. Because he kind of uses two different voices on the album.
Yeah, because he said that the other guys didn't like his regular voice, so that's why he kind of came up with that nasal voice, you know. Because
Muggs explicitly said that if he couldn't find a way to like make himself sound unique, he was going to have to write for sen-dog. And Be Real was like, I don't want to be a writer, you know, I want to be a rapper. So, and they convinced him to kind of try that voice when the Ram LZ thing came up.
And you know, Sen has got that very hard, strong, gruff voice, and it just perfectly balances with Be Real's voice.
Yeah. What that Check the Technique says again is that Be Real's voice was based on the fact that sen-dog had such a low voice. That's why he developed the high one as a balance.
Yeah, and then Muggs liked the way it kind of cut through the beat because the production was so like, there's so much going on in the production that Be Real's became like a guy that was spitting bars, but then his voice almost became like another instrument and like another part of the production, just in the timbre of it and the way it mixed in with everything.
It's like the reverse of Public Enemy, you know, like you got Chuck D with the heavy bass in his voice, and then you got Flavor who's just like,
Yeah, right. All right. Well, we got Ultraviolet Dreams up next, the interlude, which Skiz wanted to talk about. So let's hear a bit of that.
Ultraviolet Dreams. Take a hear that stuff. Ultraviolet Dreams. That's that shit like, man. Ultraviolet Dreams. It's like oh no. That's the Ultraviolet Dreams.
One of several blunted out interludes of that sort.
Gotta have interludes. I think the guy who was really famous for doing the interludes was Premier, the instrumental interludes on albums. Premier always had like 2 or 3 of them, and they were always dope as shit, you know? So this was kind of like the style at the time. Like the DJ always had his DJ cut in there. And this kind of hints at Muggs' later work, you know, what we were just talking about, what he's doing now. You know, he does a lot of instrumental stuff as well as working with MCs. But this one is just basically just like one loop. It's that Muddy Waters Tomcat loop. And it is just amazing. It's just like, you know, it fits that psychedelic Cypress Hill vibe, you know, and just like a nice little short little musical interlude in there.
Yeah.
After 3 straight songs about street life too, this is a good, or I guess 4 straight songs because Holding the Head is there. This is a good gateway into the whole weed smoking element of the album as well.
Yeah, right. They're passing the blunt. And then it's into Light Another.
Yo, like when it back when they turn me like the Buddha. You say I'm the joint, but you can call me Huda. Computer, visit to boot your scissors. Cut me up and smoking, blow me out like a blizzard. Well, lace yourselves up, let's stop the
I didn't really have anything too deep to say about this song. I just always, as I got older, found it hilarious how upbeat a song this is for a song about getting high.
Yeah.
You know, and it's still one that I like to throw in my sets. This fucking mixes so well.
Yeah, that kind of strikes me about the whole album in general, like how up-tempo and upbeat it is, especially when compared to like the following decade. You can kind of hear this group and the whole rest of hip-hop, the tempo slows down, and I think even the music gets a darker feel and tone to it, which in my estimation, this is crackpot idea, but I just felt like this was like kind of opening the door to the era of like a lot of weed smoking, and like when you're stoned, like slower beats sound better. And I feel like, you know, even though the beats on this album are pretty fast, like after this, you know, the beats just get slower. And I just remember Andre 3000 talking about how like producing beats like based on the drugs that people are using. When they had B.O.B. come out, he said it was because everyone was doing a lot of cocaine at the time or whatever. But I don't know. Like I said, it's a crackpot idea, but I think maybe weed made music slow down in the 90s.
I think that's a good perception there, because definitely early 90s, like 90, 91, 92, tempo was much more up, you know? And that Cypress Hill 2-step we were talking about before, you know, that kind of up-tempo dance thing you do. And then it became, like you said, more weed, you get the head nod. It definitely had something to do with the weed, because then as you move more into the mid 90s, the weed that people were smoking was called chocolate in New York. And it was much heavier, let me tell you. It was much heavier.
Right.
It's not like the weed you get out in Cali, you know. In the South, they call it dank, because this stuff brings you down into the dungeon. It's just like a downer. It's not a high, it's a downer buzz. And definitely, you know, by the time we hit like Mobb Deep, Wu-Tang era, that's in full effect. Right. And that's where that head nod comes from, you know, head nodding beats. Because dudes are just like huffing on, chain smoking this blunts of chocolate, and just like in the lab, just like making these like 95 BPM beats.
Right. Well, I remember around this time too, you know, maybe it was because I was a young, little 8th, 9th grade stoner, and I could only get my hands on this cheap weed. But it seemed like around this time, you know, you started to have more like really strong, good quality weed in general. And like it, you know, so I think maybe as the 90s progressed, like the weed just got stronger and people got more stoned, as well as, you know, getting into the different strains, you know, the indica as opposed to the sativas or whatever. But and
I'm telling you, the weed is different coastally. Like on the West Coast, you guys get a whole different, and now it's exploded, but imagine the 90s, it was still, the West Coast was the mecca of weed. On the East Coast, we would get it from Jamaica, okay? And it was like this, they used to hard pack it. It was like compressed. So like you get a little part and like you break it up and it all of a sudden becomes a lot. You know, I mean, I've seen how it was smuggled. People used to smuggle it in like Congo drums and pack it in the side of the drums, and then you break the drum open and you get this weed. And that was the weed that was the ghetto weed that you get in New York at like there was usually a little store that had like a few boxes of laundry detergent in the window, and you have to be buzzed in, and, you know, you put your money through a slot and you could get nickels and dimes, you know, $5, $10, $20 worth of weed. And that's what dudes in the hood, that's how dudes in the hood buy their weed. They don't buy ounces and stuff like that. They buy like a nickel or a dime few times a day type shit, you know?
Yeah, well, we got a similar thing in California, but it was from Mexico. But yeah, just the cheap hard packed dirt weed full of stems and seeds.
But it was strong. It was strong, wasn't it?
Yeah, ours wasn't. Not that strong usually. Not the Mexican stuff. How about you? You probably got that too in Texas, right? Chief.
Yeah, we got the same stuff Jonah was getting, but ours wasn't too bad, you know.
And we were talking about the connection between the weed and the music, and he was saying, like, definitely I think there's a connection, because in the early 90s, the tempo was really up to like, you know, 92, 93, and then it just like really started slowing down. And just having been on the ground at the time, I noticed a change in the weed that we were getting in New York, like in Brooklyn and stuff like that. And it was a much stronger weed. So it brought the BPMs down. You know, it was more that head nod shit now. You know, it was more like this compared to like that up tempo vibe, which still this Cypress Hill record was.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and listening to that same interview from right when they were about to release their album, they also mentioned that this album in particular was kind of specifically like an ode to hip hop and the hip hop that brought them up, as well as it being like sort of their statement about this is how we feel about gangster stuff, this is how we feel about weed. But production wise, they explicitly were kind of trying to embrace that classic hip hop sound as well, which, as y'all mentioned, as things moved on and they sort of leaned heavier into the weed side, yeah, everything definitely mellowed out, just like the culture was kind of mellowing out at that time.
But one thing you got to say about Cypress Hill is, you know, they were one of those groups from that era who had longevity in their career, because they were always able to change with the times. And also, you know, at one point they went totally into a rock direction, you know, which was, I guess, good for them in one way. I mean, I stopped following them after Temple of Boom for some reason, you know, because they kind of veered hard to the rock direction.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but I just wasn't, you know, kind of used to that at the time. But to say to their credit, they have consistently sold records, you know, whether they were doing, you know, straight rap or rap rock fusion or straight rock, they have always sold records and they've always toured. And that has led to a longevity of a career. You know, they're probably still putting out records, right? I mean, I don't know, but I'm sure they are. Like,
I believe they just put something out within the past 3 years.
And then Muggs has got his own thing going on with Soul Assassins. I mean, so these guys turned out to be one of the successful, you know, franchises in 90s era hip hop.
Yeah. Yeah, they put out another album, I think it was last year, which for me, I also lost interest around Temples of Boom, because I feel like it just seemed like lyrically and vocally, they were kind of just repeating the same formula over and over. I got kind of tired of it, and probably my tastes just changed a bit, but yeah, Muggs has continued to really impress me, and the thing they put out last year or whenever it was, called Elephants on Acid, I think. Amazing,
how was that?
Amazing production by Muggs.
Really?
Again.
I gotta check that out.
Yeah, it takes a more of a Middle Eastern direction, where he started messing with sitars way back in like Temples of Boom era, but this one goes like full-fledged like Middle Eastern style stoner rap, whatever it is. It's interesting.
There was a question I wanted to pose. I forgot to do it while we were sort of in the hand on the pump and how I could just kill a man round. But you talked about how sort of shocking that violence element was for you. Mm-hmm. One thing that was shocking me, and I don't know if y'all had this sort of same reaction, was how judiciously they used the N-word. Like, it was
I never noticed
interesting to hear Latin cats, even growing up in Texas, just say it that freely and kind of be on both sides of the playing field with it as well. Like, in some ways it's the term of endearment, but in other ways you can tell it's like the Mayate side of things, you know, it's like we're using this as a target, you know, and it was kind of jarring as
Right.
somebody who was real kind of aware of growing up Black.
I thought they must have been Black and Latino, you know? I didn't know.
Sen-dog is Black Cuban. Chief, I definitely noticed that. I definitely picked that up. I picked that up. And all I can say is in Latin culture, in New York at least, like Puerto Ricans in New York, use the N-word freely amongst themselves or to Black people. But I don't know what it's like in LA. And I know that in LA, there's tension between the Blacks and the Hispanics. So that's why I was wondering about it, because it's like, how can he go around so freely using that in that environment? Like I wasn't sure if that flew, you know.
Well, that's kind of what I meant by both sides, because he does sort of use it on some sides, like, yo, you know, these are my N-words, these are my people. But then another one, you know, fuck my shotgun, N-words getting jumped, you know, it's like, yeah, so it's like having your cake and eating it too, you know. And then we'll talk about a Funky Phil one later, but punctuates every verse, but that's another story, Black. So it's like, okay, so then that's like another spectrum of it, you know, like being a Latin cat, but also kind of being so aware of the Black element. And maybe it's just being a fan of hip hop and being a fan, you know, you're going to be around a shitload of Black folks and Puerto Rican folks, especially in New York, or a bunch of Black folks in LA.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about it that way. All right, we got the Funky Feel one on deck.
Are you ready? Ladies and gentlemen, are ready to be live? Well, I'm the real one, just the funky fair one. Cypress Hill has come, any questions ask them. 'Cause we are answering any brothers that have been on the dick swinging and straight gathering into all the info. 'Cause yo, what you info? It's a crazy gangsta and a pimp.
To me, this is the closest you hear to them not doing their sort of performative voices. Like Be Real is kind of doing the nasal thing at times, but he kind of pulls back on it too.
You know, I wouldn't be surprised. This is pure conjecture, but I feel like this could be an older song, because what I heard is that they started working on this album in 1989, and that, you know, just the title of it itself, the real one, the Funky Feel one, it doesn't sound like, you know, so much like the rest of their more how I could just kill a man, hand on the pump lyrics.
I do think you're right, just from that Joe Rogan Be Real interview. Be Real was mentioned, and was Funky Phil one was the first time that he kind of tried the voice. And then the next song that he did it when the recording process was How I Could Just Kill a Man, and then Hand on the Pump. And they were saying, like, as they were doing the recording process and making the album, people were like, yeah, that's it. Like, that's the voice. So it sounded like they already had songs in the can before they really leaned into that vocal style that they do.
Interesting. Let's check out Real Estate. What I love about this is that the little kids squabbling on the playground, which I think makes it into one or two more songs on this album. And then it's on the next album too, just like little screeching kids become a musical instrument, which...
You're talking about that little, like...
Hey, give us the ball back! I think he's saying, hey, give us the ball back. Sorry.
It's from...
Copycat by Barcase.
It's like right at the beginning of the song. It sounds like they're at a concert or something. Some people are yelling.
Oh.
And just, it's like 2 seconds and then they go into the song. And
Like you wouldn't normally think of sampling something like that. It's just like that little piece of noise that Muggs likes to use, you know?
this was going to be the song where I went on my big eloquent speech about Muggs using every part of the Buffalo. But yeah, everything that y'all been saying about Muggs throughout tonight, this is the song to me that best encapsulates that. The way that he cuts stuff up and arranges it and then flips it, and he's got movements in his beats and stuff. And then the little voice that you're talking about, like how he brings it back at the end and it kind of plays out in like a weird broken tape loop sort of thing. Yeah, Muggs, you got to give Muggs his flowers while he's still around.
He was like the RZA before the RZA was the RZA.
Yeah.
You know? They have a very similar approach to sampling, where they take the most non-obvious shit, and most of the times it's just sound or noise, and they string a few of these sounds together to make one complete phrase. It's incredible, you know. It's like it's the real art of sampling, where you can piece together so many disparate sounds, you know, which you're taking garbage noise basically, and you're making something harmonic or melodic out of it. It just blows the mind, you know, just that guys can do shit like that and make pop hits out of it, you know. It's like, fuck.
I wonder too how much chicken and egg is like Muggs being that wild and free with the production versus Be Real and Sen-Dog leaning into like really freeing up their voices and stuff. Because at a point it starts to feel sort of synergetic. But I wonder like what informed what, you know, as far as the performance of the production.
Well, I think you can't separate the two, because it's all together. And you can obviously tell that these guys are a very tight crew. You know, they came up together. It makes all the difference. You know, it's like when they're in the studio, it's telepathic.
Let's move on to Stoned is the Way of the Walk.
Stoned is the way of the walk. Stoned is the way of the walk. Well, it's the alley cat popping on a hoodie mask. I think I'm a criminal, but yo, I ain't all of that. Hit you with the baseball bat when you want an eldo. Wanna mess around, you get fucked on the hill, bro. Kicking like a steel toe. Real slow hits from the bong make me feel like Cheech, and I'm kicking it with Chong. Just like Cheech and Chong, frontin' with ice cream. Cypress Hill is here to give you an ice cream. Speak it like a roller.
I was just waiting for the chorus. It's got like an 80-bar verse.
He gives you bonus bars on that one.
Yeah. I guess it's just one verse and a chorus, and then it's done.
And pretty much that one loop that down here on the ground, Grant Green, that Tribe Called Quest used, that classic jazzy loop.
Right. Yeah, I feel like this is
a little sped up.
This is a more weed tempoed track, probably the slowest track on the album.
This quickly became my favorite song on the album. I don't know, even though like they always have good like gangster songs, but then even like on Black Sunday, like the Son of a Preacher Man flip became like my favorite song. It's always like their super mellow weed songs that just hit me like right in the feels, you know.
This was a classic, straight up. I mean, how could you not 100%. Like it?
Yeah. I'm going to blame this song for eventually developing a weed habit. I heard this and I was like, I want to get high. I want to know what that's about.
Well, you know, I was a child of the 80s and staunchly opposed to drugs of all sorts. I watched those This Is Your Brain on Drugs commercials, and I was very much against all forms of drugs. And this album, the first day that I heard this album in full was also the first day that I smoked weed. So it has a special place in my heart for that reason.
Nice.
I actually had this cockamamie scheme because I was so against weed, and I was so upset that, like, you know, growing up in this rural town, there were only like 30 kids in my class, and I was the only kid in my class besides the one other lower on the totem pole kid than me. Like, he was like the biggest nerd, and I was like one step up from him. We were the only ones that didn't smoke weed. And I had this scheme. I was gonna smoke weed and then quit so that I could be an example to all the other kids and be able to preach that like drugs are bad. But it didn't work. Anyways.
You got hooked. Now look at you.
Yeah.
Look at your brain on drugs.
You got the best stories about your past, man. I love hearing old stories about you.
Yeah, it started this 30-year-long guilty relationship with weed. I always did it with a tinge of guilt up until now. Even now, I only smoke on my birthday.
I was such a square till college, man. It was around. I just never really wanted to fuck with it until I got to college.
Well, Cypress Hill will do it to you, man. If you're not smoking weed before, Cypress Hill will do it to you.
That was interesting too, like not being a weed smoker when Cypress Hill was rising and then becoming an adult and getting high and going back and listening to it. I think that's where I really started appreciating Muggs's production in the album. Because for the longest time, I was so heavy a lyrics guy. Like, I was a little nerd kid who just absorbed all the fucking lyrics from every song, you know? So yeah, I loved like the way these guys sounded and what they were saying. And then getting older and hearing songs like this as I was getting high, I was like, damn, there's a whole nother world going on in this album that I've never really ever paid attention to.
Yeah, it is. That my friend was saying something about that the other day when we were talking about it. Like there is something conducive to being stoned and listening to this album for the sonic qualities, which I'm not sure I can fully wrap my head around why, but maybe it's something to do with the dissonance, the kind of discordant elements and the noisy elements that being in that kind of altered mind state, that foggy mind state, somehow allows you to vibe with that a little bit easier than you otherwise might. I don't know.
I wonder too if it's got something to do with the sequencing and the pacing of the album. Because the only other album I can really think of that I had a similar experience with, ironically enough, was The Chronic by Dr. Dre. Like, I used to listen to that just because it banged in my car. And then as I became a weed smoker, it unfolded this whole other world of sonic quality and production shit going on that I just never paid attention to because I was skipping through like my 6, 7 favorite songs, you know? Maybe just you get more patient with the listening experience, getting high.
I got to mention that horn on Stone is the Way of the Walk too, because I actually looked that up. I was like, where the fuck did you get that? And it's from a record I've never heard of by an artist named Ingrid. And the song is Easter Parade. And it's an 8-minute song. And this horn comes from like the last 2 seconds of it. And Muggs just slowed it down dramatically to get that.
It's such like a perfect drunken elephants on parade sort of a
exactly
sound.
It's got that quirky quality, but it's kind of dark and it's definitely stoned.
Well, and it's the perfect like 4-beat bed for the way that then when he brings the drums in, and he's got such an attack heavy kick that hits like on those big ones, you know? Because he has like a regular kick, but then when he gets to like 1-1 instead of like, or 1-4, it's always that big kick, you know?
Right.
And then he'll do like 3 other bars with the little kick, and then like that big, super heavy kick will hit again. And it works well with like the way that horn is such a like kind of drunken element, and then it goes out and it's just got the organ stabs from Grant Green in it.
You got to have that kick for the cars, you know, for the low riders.
Yeah, this used to bang too in the car. I had to turn this up when I was driving around, annoy the hell out of everybody.
In fact, all hip hop is like that. I've heard so many stories of artists who go, and I've seen it myself, who they're in the studio and they tell the engineer, make a cassette of that, and they go check it out in their car, see how it sounds in the car, you know?
I do that to this day. I listen to it on my monitors, I listen to it in the headphones, and then I burn or throw it on an iPod, take it out to the car and listen to it in the car.
You were mentioning the sequencing, Chief, and what struck me as I was just looking at the track list now is how the first 4 songs are the most like street-oriented, violent songs by far. It's Pigs, How I Could Just Kill a Man, Hand on the Pump, Hole in the Head. And then it's all like weed and party songs for the rest of the album.
That's what I was talking about earlier.
That's true. Yeah, you mentioned that. You said Ultraviolet Dreams was like the intro into the weed part of it. Right?
Yeah, and then even the singles, you know, because like the singles that aren't the killing songs are Funky Philwin and Latin Lingo. So, you know, they kind of talk about it a little bit on Latin Lingo, getting high, but there's no like overtly getting high singles that came out from this album. So yeah, it was interesting just hearing so much like gun rap, gangster rap. And then it does, like Jonah says, it makes a pretty drastic switch, you know, from like the second quarter through the rest of the album. And those violent elements and gangster elements are still there. They're just not as prominent as at like the very beginning.
All right, let's move on to Latin Lingo. This will be the last one we talk about, I guess.
Another brightest problem. One of the many of the Latins that stay on yo. And I got plenty for the Jennies trying to hound yo. But wait, they're clowning on me because of my language. I have to tell them straight up, it's called Spanglish. Now who's on the bean? Got a gringo trying to get paid from the funky violin. Latin lingo, funky violin. Latin lingo, funky violin.
That was again what I heard as children, but it's obviously not. It's just like screechy people voices.
Yeah, he samples just like some crowd noise or some noise on the end of a record.
Yeah.
But that main sample is a song called Mongoose by Elephant's Memory. Never heard of him.
Man, I have heard of Elephant's Memory. I didn't realize that's what that
You
was.
have? You have?
Yeah, my friend Matthew is a really fucking talented producer, and he was the kind of guy that would just study old hip hop and then just go looking for those samples. And I remember he discovered Elephant's Memory and brought that up. But I didn't realize that's what this sample was from.
Yeah. But this was the first rap in Spanglish, wasn't it?
No.
I think Kid Frost was doing it too. Like he had Baraza and
Mellow Man Ace. Mellow Man Ace was the first.
Well, the Mellow Man Ace. They were all crew.
Mentirosa. Remember?
Oh, right. But this was definitely one of the more popular.
Yeah, they definitely helped bring it more into the forefront for sure. I was just researching that the whole lineage of like Latin rap. It was like Mellow Man Ace in 89, Kid Frost in 90, these guys in 91. I forget when Lighter Shade of Brown came out.
But are we talking straight Spanish rap or Spanglish or, you know, like a mixture? Or...
I mean, even with the Spanglish, it'd be Mellow Man Ace.
None of them did straight Spanish because that would be just unheard of on the radio. But it was Spanglish, was acceptable.
I remember Cypress Hill started re-releasing these albums in straight Spanish too.
Oh, right, yeah.
But that was later on down the road.
And when did Gerardo come out?
Yeah, that must have been around this time. Rico Suave.
Rico. But you know what's great about this song too is the Prince Paul version, the Prince Paul remix, which I hadn't heard until this last week. A really cool version of it. I guess it came out on a 12-inch. I just heard it for the first time.
I gotta look that up.
You have it?
Let me see. I do have it. Yeah, I'll play it.
Yeah, play it. I haven't heard that.
Yeah, they had a Black Sunday. I guess it was an anniversary, whatever release that this was on. But before that, it came out on a 12-inch, and they also included the "Stoned Is the Way of the Walk" reprise with Sun Doobie. It's like a new version with new lyrics.
¿Quieres ser un pescador?
Buongiorno, Pietro.
Transform.
Hey, let's start the fucking show, eh?
Yeah, there you go. I always said fuck it.
A freak to the funk that no one else bring. Sen-dog with the funky violin grip. Yeah, that's the nombre. Heard that homemade piece, Camelo and Frost. And get the boat there. Sen-dog is not a kid, I'm veterano, I'm down. Another body spinal. One of the many of the Latins, it's the año. And I got plenty for the Jennies trying to hide you. But wait, they're clowning on me because of my language. I have to tell them straight up, it's called Spanglish. Now who's on the bingo, the gringo, trying to get paid for the funky violin. Funky violin.
I don't remember that. When did it came out? Like around that time?
I think it was a Latin Lingo 12-inch that had that on it. Yeah.
That machine loading up noise was really cool.
Yeah, I like how he brings in the noise for this the chorus. He gets noisy with it for the occasion.
Yo, he mentioned tribal. Was he talking about Booyah Tribe, or were they way later?
No, they were down with Cypress.
Yeah, I think they were friends
Okay.
of some sort, yeah.
Word. I forgot all about Booyah Tribe until just now.
Yeah, I used to love that album. If you guys want to join us for the After Hours, Chief and I will be talking about Black Sunday. That's only for our Patreon subscribers. You can become one yourself at patreon.com/weirdrap for just $3.
Stoned is the way of the walk.